At 07:15 on September 20th, 1944, Major Charles Carpenter climbed into the cockpit of his L-4 Grasshopper at a forward airstrip near Arracourt, France, watching fog roll across the runway thick enough to hide German Panther tanks advancing 3 miles away. 31 years old, 400 flight hours as an artillery spotter, 0 tanks destroyed. The Germans had just launched a counterattack with the 5th Panzer Army, 47 Panther tanks, 30 armoured cars. The 4th Armoured Division's Combat Command A was pinned down. Carpenter's job was simple: fly over enemy positions, call in artillery coordinates, watch other men fight. The L-4 Grasshopper was a military version of the Piper J-3 Cub. Fabric-covered wings, 85 mph top speed, 2 seats, no armour, no guns. German soldiers called them Maytag Messers because the 40-horsepower Continental engine sounded like a washing machine. American artillery spotters flew 500 missions per month over France. German troops rarely shot at them. Killing an unarmed spotter plane would reveal your position to every Allied gun within 10 miles. It was a gentleman's agreement that kept pilots alive, but Carpenter had watched that agreement break men. 3 weeks earlier, his 4th Armoured Division had lost 41 Sherman tanks in 6 days near Luneville. 32 crews killed. German Panthers could spot Shermans from 2,000 yards. By the time American tank commanders saw the enemy, Panther guns were already firing. 75mm shells punched through Sherman frontal armor at 800 yards. Most crews never made it out. Carpenter flew over the burning tanks every day, counted the bodies, called in the coordinates, watched smoke rise from hatches that would never open again. His radio crackled with desperate voices calling for artillery support that arrived too late. He could see German armor maneuvering, could track their positions, could do absolutely nothing except report and watch American soldiers die. 3 months of that had changed something in Carpenter. 2 days earlier, he'd cornered an ordnance technician and a crew chief at the airstrip. Asked them a question that made both men stare at him like he'd lost his mind. Could they mount M1 bazookas on his Grasshopper's wing struts? Wire the firing mechanisms into his cockpit? Turn a fabric-covered observation plane into something that could fight back? The technician had laughed, then stopped laughing when he realized Carpenter was serious. If you want to see how Carpenter's unauthorized modification turned an artillery spotter into America's only airborne tank ace, please hit that like button. It helps us share more stories like this. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Carpenter. By dawn, 6 bazooka tubes jutted from his wing struts like metal fangs, each one loaded with a 2.36-inch rocket. Each rocket packed enough explosive power to punch through 3 inches of armor plate. Carpenter had painted Rosie the Rocketer on the fuselage in white letters. The fog was lifting. Through the dissipating grey, Carpenter could see shapes moving toward Combat Command A. Panther tanks, and he had 6 rockets with his name on them. The idea had come to Carpenter 3 weeks earlier during the siege of Luneville. He'd been flying reconnaissance over German positions when he spotted a column of Wehrmacht trucks moving supplies to the front. Perfect artillery target. Carpenter radioed the coordinates, waited. By the time American guns found the range, the trucks had vanished into the forest. He'd watched the shells land on empty road. That night in the officer's tent, Carpenter met 2 other L-4 pilots, Lieutenant Harley Merrick and Lieutenant Roy Carson. They'd been drinking and talking about a crazy idea. What if they mounted weapons on their Cubs? Not for defense, for attack. Carson had already tried it. Strapped 2 M1 bazookas to his wing. Struts. Destroyed 2 German supply trucks near Metz. Command hadn't officially approved it, but they hadn't stopped it either. Patton's Third Army was moving too fast to wait for official paperwork. Carpenter found an ordnance technician named Sergeant William Morrison the next morning. Morrison was a farm kid from Iowa who could fix anything with wire and determination. They worked on the modification for 2 days. The technical challenge was weight. The L-4 Grasshopper had a maximum cargo capacity of 232 lb. A single M1 bazooka weighed 13 lb. 6 bazookas meant 78 lb. Add the mounting brackets, the electrical wiring, the firing switches. They were pushing the aircraft's limits before they even loaded the rockets. Each bazooka had to be angled slightly upward, 15 degrees. This gave Carpenter a fighting chance during shallow dives. The rockets wouldn't drop straight down. They'd arc toward the target while Carpenter pulled up and away from return fire. Morrison wired the firing mechanisms to a panel he installed just left of Carpenter's seat. 6 toggle switches, 1 for each rocket. Flip a switch. A battery sent an electrical charge through copper wire to the bazooka's igniter. The rocket's propellant caught fire. 2 lb of thrust pushed the projectile down the tube at 280 ft per second. The warhead was the M6 high-explosive anti-tank round, 6.5 in long, 3.4 lb. The shaped charge used the Monroe effect. Upon impact, copper lining collapsed inward, formed a superheated jet. Temperature reached 3,000 degrees, hot enough to punch through steel like butter, but there were problems. German Panther tanks had frontal armor 8 in thick. The M6 rocket could barely scratch it. Side armor was 3 in. Still difficult, but the top of a Panther's turret. The engine deck, 40 mm meets 1.6 in. The rocket could penetrate that, which meant Carpenter had to attack from above, dive at German tanks, fire his rockets, pull up before German machine guns shredded his fabric-covered wings. Morrison had done the math. At 80 mosh in a dive, Carpenter would have maybe 3 seconds to line up his shot, 3 seconds to fire, 3 seconds to pull up before slamming into the ground or flying into a wall of German bullets. The Grasshopper had no armor. 1 machine gun round through the engine would send Carpenter into an uncontrolled crash. 1 bullet through the fuel tank would turn the aircraft into a fireball. Morrison finished the last wiring connection, stepped back, looked at Carpenter. "You sure about this?" Carpenter thought about the 32 tank crews that died at Lunaville, about the voices on his radio calling for help that never came now. Carpenter pushed the throttle forward. The Grasshopper lifted off the runway, the fog was gone, and directly ahead 5 Panther tanks rolled toward Combat Command A. Time to Tuahu. See if this worked. Carpenter spotted the first Panther at 1,100 yards. The tank was moving northeast along a tree line, turret rotating, searching for American positions. Behind it, 4 more Panthers. Between them, half a dozen armored cars. The entire German column stretched maybe 800 yards. Carpenter's hands were shaking. He'd never fired a weapon from an aircraft before, never attacked anything more dangerous than a supply truck. Now he was diving at 5 tanks that could kill him with a single burst from their machine guns. The Grasshopper descended through 800 FT, 700, 600. At 500 FT, the Germans saw him. A Panther's hull-mounted machine gun opened fire. Tracer rounds arced up like angry fireflies. Carpenter heard fabric tear, felt the aircraft shudder. A round had punched through his left wing, missed the strut by inches. 400 FT. The lead Panther filled his vision. Carpenter could see the commander standing in the open hatch, could see the man pointing at him, shouting orders. Carpenter flipped the first toggle switch. Nothing happened. He flipped it again. Still nothing. The electrical connection had failed, or the battery was dead, or Morrison had crossed a wire somewhere. 300 FT. The Panther's turret was turning toward him. That 75mm gun could swat him from the sky like a fly. Carpenter flipped the second switch. The bazooka fired. The rocket screamed from its tube. white smoke trail. The Grasshopper lurched sideways from the recoil. Carpenter fought the controls, watched the rocket arc down. It struck the Panther's engine deck dead center. The explosion sent metal fragments spinning through the air. Black smoke poured from the tank's engine compartment. The Panther lurched to a stop. The commander dropped inside the turret. Hatches slammed shut. One tank immobilized, 5 rockets left. Carpenter yanked the stick back, climbed. The Grasshopper groaned under the G-forces. More machine gun fire followed him up. Rounds whipped past his cockpit. One bullet shattered his instrument panel. Glass and metal sprayed across his lap. He was at 800 FT when he banked hard left. The remaining Panthers had scattered. German commanders had realized this wasn't just an observation plane. This thing had teeth. Carpenter circled, looking for his next target. An armored car was racing toward a stone farmhouse, trying to find cover. Carpenter pushed the nose down, entered his second dive. 600 FT, 500, 400. He fired the third rocket. Direct hit. The armored car erupted in flames. Ammunition inside started cooking off. Secondary explosions tore the vehicle apart. Carpenter had 2 problems now. First, he'd fired 2 rockets. That meant his Grasshopper was now asymmetrical. The right wing was heavier than the left. The aircraft wanted to roll starboard. He had to fight the controls to keep it level. Second, every German on the ground knew he was hostile. A Panther's main gun fired. The shell passed so close, Carpenter felt the pressure wave. His ears rang. The Grasshopper bucked like a horse. For a second he thought he'd been hit, but the controls still responded. The engine still ran. He fired his 4th rocket at 300 MFT, missed. The projectile slammed into the ground 20 yards. From a Panther. Dirt and shrapnel peppered the tank's side armor. No penetration. Carpenter had 2 rockets left, and he was out of altitude. He pulled up, leveled off at 1,000 Talfa. His fuel gauge showed half empty. He'd been in the air 20 minutes, felt like 20 hours. Then he saw them down below. Combat Command A's trapped support units, water trucks, supply vehicles. 40 men pinned behind a low ridge. German Panthers were advancing on their position. In 5 minutes, those men would be dead or captured. Carpenter turned south, pushed the throttle to maximum. The Grasshopper screamed back toward the airstrip at 90 meter par. He needed more rockets, and he was going back for a second run. Carpenter landed hard at the forward airstrip. The Grasshopper bounced twice, skidded to a stop. Morrison was already running toward him with a crew of ordnance handlers. "How many?" "2 confirmed," Carpenter shouted over the engine noise. "Maybe 3. Need to reload now." Morrison's crew went to work. They had practiced this. 6 men, 6 rockets, 2 minutes. Each bazooka had to be reloaded from the rear. One man held the tube steady. Another slid the rocket in, secured the electrical connection, moved to the next launcher. Carpenter didn't shut down the engine, didn't climb out, just sat in the cockpit watching the clock. Every second mattered. Those trapped support units at Arracourt were still pinned down. 1 minute 40 seconds. Morrison gave the thumbs up. Carpenter released the brakes. The Grasshopper rolled forward, lifted off. He was back over Arracourt 12 minutes after his first attack. The situation had changed. The immobilized Panther from his first run was still smoking, but the other tanks had regrouped. They'd formed a defensive perimeter around the trapped American support crews. German infantry had dismounted from their armored cars, were moving forward through a wheat field. Carpenter came in from the east, sun behind him. The Panthers didn't see him until he was at 600 FT. He fired 2 rockets in quick succession. The first missed, struck the ground between 2 armored cars. The second hit an SID KFZ, 251 half-track dead center. The vehicle's fuel tank exploded. Burning gasoline spread across the wheat field. German infantry scattered. The trapped American waterpoint crews saw their chance, started their trucks, broke cover, drove hard for friendly lines while Carpenter made another pass. His last 2 rockets both hit. One struck a Panther's turret ring, jammed the traverse mechanism. The tank could still move but couldn't aim its gun. The other hit an armored car, disabled it. Carpenter climbed to a 1,500 Tatevtools circled. The German attack had stalled. The Panthers were withdrawing, pulling back toward their own lines. The American support crews had escaped. Carpenter returned to the airstrip, landed, shut down the engine, sat in the cockpit for 5 minutes. Hands wouldn't stop shaking. Morrison approached carefully. "You okay?" Carpenter nodded. Reloaded. That afternoon, Carpenter flew a 3rd sortie, found a German supply column near Nancy, destroyed 2 more trucks. When he landed, there were 15 people waiting at the airstrip. Word had spread. Pilots, ground crews, even a Stars and Stripes correspondent, named Wes Gallagher, who'd heard about the crazy major attacking tanks in a Piper Cub. By evening, Major General John Wood, commander of the 4th Armored Division, arrived at the airstrip. Wanted to see this bazooka-equipped Grasshopper himself. Wanted to meet the pilot who just saved 40 men and stopped a German counterattack. Wood asked one question. "Can other pilots do this?" Carpenter said yes, if they're willing to fly low and get shot at. Within a week, 3 more L-4 pilots had bazookas mounted on their aircraft. Lieutenant Ralph Whitell, Captain James Parker, Lieutenant George Wilson. None of them achieved Carpenter's success rate, but they proved the concept worked. A $20,000 observation plane could damage tanks that cost $200,000. The German High Command issued new orders on September 25th. All American liaison aircraft were now priority targets. Cubs with weapons mounted on wing struts were to be shot down on sight. The gentleman's agreement was over, and Carpenter had just painted a target on every L-4 Grasshopper in France, October 3, 1944. A German flak gunner near Metz watched an American L-4 Grasshopper approach at 800 FT standard observation plane, harmless. The gunner tracked it through his sights, but held fire. Revealing his position would bring American artillery down on his head within minutes. Then he saw the tubes under the wings. The gunner opened fire. 20mm shells tore through the air. The Grasshopper banked hard, escaped, but the message had been sent. The Luftwaffe intelligence office at Nancy received a report that evening. American liaison aircraft were now armed. Consider all Cubs hostile. German tank commanders started carrying new standing orders. Engage American observation aircraft on site. Use machine guns. Use main guns if necessary. Do not let them get close. Carpenter noticed the change immediately. Before October, German troops ignored his Grasshopper. Now every machine gun in range opened fire the moment they saw him. Flak batteries that used to hold their fire now tracked him across the sky. Panzer commanders rotated their turrets toward him instead of toward ground targets. On October 5th, a Panther fired its main gun at Carpenter from 900 yards. The shell missed by 30 AFT. But the Germans were learning. They'd figured out that a 75mm high explosive shell didn't need a direct hit to destroy a fabric-covered aircraft. The blast wave alone could tear it apart. Carpenter adapted. He started flying lower, 50 ft above the ground, using tree lines for cover, approaching targets from unexpected angles. The Germans expected attacks from above. Carpenter started coming in from the sides, from behind ridges. Once he flew down a river, valley, and popped up behind a German supply depot before anyone saw him coming. He also upgraded his weapons. The M1 bazooka had been adequate against light armor, but German tanks were getting heavier. The new Panther S-4G had improved turret armor. The Tiger II was arriving at the front with armor the M1 rocket couldn't touch. Morrison found a solution. The M9 Bazooka, improved version. Same weight as the M1, but fired the M6A3 heat rocket. Could penetrate. 3.9 in of armor at 30 degree. More importantly, it was more reliable. The M1's electrical firing system failed 15% of the time. The M9 rarely malfunctioned. Carpenter's ground crew removed his 6 M1 launchers, installed 6 M9s. The new rockets weighed slightly more. Morrison had to recalculate the weight distribution, add ballast to the tail to keep the aircraft balanced. The modification took 6 hours. By October 10th, Rosie the Rocketer was back. In action. Carpenter destroyed 3 German trucks that day, an armored car on the 11th. On October 13th, he caught a Panther with its hatches open, crew standing outside smoking. They didn't hear the Grasshopper until it was 200 yards away. Carpenter fired from 100 FT. The rocket hit the engine deck. The tank erupted in flames. That kill brought his official total to 4 tanks destroyed. Unofficially, crew chiefs and ground observers claimed he'd hit at least 8, some damaged but still mobile, others abandoned by their crews. The Germans started calling him der verrückte Major, the Mad Major. Radio intercepts picked up warnings. When Panzer commanders spotted an L-4 with underwing weapons, they radioed alerts to nearby units. The small plane with rockets. Avoid if possible. Shoot down if not. Carpenter told the Stars and Stripes reporter that the word must be getting around. Every time I show up now, they shoot with everything. They have. They never used to bother Cubs. Bazookas must be bothering them a bit. Then, on October 18th, 4th Armored Division Intelligence received reports of a major German build-up near Arracourt. 40 tanks, maybe 50. The Wehrmacht was preparing a counter-offensive to retake Nancy, and Carpenter was going to be right in the middle of it. October 19th, 1944, 05:30 hours, the 4th Armored Division received orders to advance on Chateau Salins. Intelligence reported German armor concentrating along the Saale River. 43 Panther tanks, 17 Tiger IIs, dozens of armored cars and half-tracks, the largest German formation Patton's Third Army had faced in 6 weeks.